There's just some interviews that I wish that everyone was a part of, and this is one of those. There's no good way to introduce Tim Keller without saying, I mean, just the phenomenal stuff about him, like author, writer, obviously, when it comes to speaker, when it comes to someone that when we will look back on 20, 30 years from down the road and go, wow, look at all the great things that God allowed him to do. He is one of those people, and we're excited to be here with you this afternoon, man.
Well, thank you for all that. I am Presbyterian, but nobody's perfect.
Yeah, I know. You're far from it, man. No. It's so good to be with you here again. It's our second time together.
Yeah, I'm glad to do
This same room, it's your old office.
My old office.
By the way, we'll get to that later down the road. I'm also joined here with Dustin Willis from the North American Mission Board.
Yeah.
We're going to be here with you this afternoon once again. Hey, we're going to start talking about your book. Then we're going to move to other stuff, obviously. Mm-hmm. This is book number 26. Did I count this right?
I don't know. But if you've done the research, then I'll try to fact check you on that. But maybe.
There's probably somebody who probably will try to fact check on this one. What was it like writing this one?
Well, it was hard. I'll be very honest about it. It was harder than most. It was harder than I expected. Yeah. And it's because Proverbs actually is a more difficult book. On the surface, it looks easy because most of the sayings look relatively obvious. You know, it says, if you work hard, you know, you won't be poor. You say, okay, got it. But when you actually start lining up all the different Proverbs on the same topic, so they're all scattered through. Everything it says about work, everything it says about money, everything it says about parenting. Then you start to compare them and you start to see all sorts of nuances. And not only that, generally it's an illusion to think that on the surface they're obvious. And when you start to really think about it, that's what Proverbs are like. You're supposed to be meditating on it. There's a lot more layers of meaning. And so writing the thing took 3 times longer than writing the same kind of book on Psalms. I did a daily devotional on Psalms with my wife, and this took 3 times longer. And we had no idea it would. Just because Proverbs takes more thinking just to figure out what each of those verses mean.
I can't imagine. You did a great job on it, by the way. Now, you and Kathy, this is your 3rd book together, your wife.
Yeah, right.
And my wife did the research on that one. She goes, they've written 3 books together, and I don't think we could write 3 blogs together, Maina. That's a whole other topic down the road, though. What was that like, and do you enjoy writing with your wife? And I know you're going to say yes to that one.
Well, no, and yes, I would say yes, but not because I have to. She's a way better writer than a speaker. I'm a way better speaker than a writer. I'm not nearly as good a writer.
Wow.
So when we're writing books together, you know, she'll say, okay, get your content out there.
Yeah.
So what I would do is, for each of those days, I essentially wrote a little commentary. Boring. You know, here's the verse, and here's, you know, and I had about 100 words of commentary, and Kathy says, boring. And then she would turn it into more of an essay, more elegant, more economy of style, and then I would add the prayer. So basically, I wrote the commentary, she turned it into a writerly essay as opposed to an oral commentary, and then I wrote the prayer, and that's how we did it 365 times.
Wow. I got to follow up on this one. You said you're not a good writer compared to speaking.
Right.
That to me sounds interesting, just because, man, you've written a lot of great books.
Well, yeah, but with a lot of help from, even when Kathy wasn't a co-author, I'd say 3 times out of 4 she was an editor. And no, I think most ministers are, you cannot just take what you say. If you're a good oral communicator, you put it on a piece of paper, it's really, it's terrible. It's too repetitious, the sentences are too long, and you know, when you're speaking, you actually can repeat yourself. In fact, you should, because it goes by fast, and nobody can go back and read. See, you're reading something, you go by and say, what was that again? You go back to it. When you're listening, you can't go back. So you've got to say ideas more slowly, you can repeat them. As soon as you put them on a piece of paper, you're getting boring. It's a big shift from oral style to written style, and I'm not good at it, and I need a lot of help.
It's very interesting to hear.
So we have a lot of church planners that'll be listening in and watching this video. You and your wife written 3 books together. She's edited, it seems, 3 out of the other 4 along the way. Planting, and you're at that place now. You're looking back at that journey. What's it like planting as a couple?
Well, I do think there's more than one you might say, model for a church planting marriage. We have had, Kathy went to seminary with me. We both went to Gordon Conwell. We both got master's degrees. And so she has been much more of a ministry partner in the sense of, teaching and writing and doing things inside the church. I've had some people, other couples come and look at that and say, oh, I can't be like that. And I always try to say, well, yeah, maybe you didn't get a seminary degree. You can't say there's only one way to do it.
Right.
But the one thing that is certain is that church planting spills out into the rest of your life. It's very difficult to keep it here. Your wife has to be willing to understand how sort of all-encompassing and to some degree how all-absorbing it is. The whole family, not just the wife, but the whole family has to be part of the church plant, has to be very, very active in it. And so there is a sense in which she has to be a partner. And she cannot just say, well, I got my job, you've got yours.
Right.
This job takes in the entire family, just like every other family that's really a core family to the church plant.
Sure.
So there's a sense in which the wife of the church planter does not have to be a ministry partner on the staff, actually doing active ministry inside the church, but she has to be a partner in a sense of co-owning the massive enterprise that it is. And she has to co-own it in prayer, she has to co-own it emotionally. That's also important. So in those sense, you are co-owners of it, but not necessarily, there's more than one way to do that.
Sure.
What type of wisdom do you think a pastor, a church planter, needs for the culture today?
Oh, well, in the two main things you do, well, I shouldn't say there's three main things I would say. I would say if you're going to break down what a church does, you've got worship. In a sense, you just have to sing praises to God. That's worship. Yeah. You have to do evangelism. That's singing praises to the world. Singing praises of God to the world. And then you have edification, discipling. That's singing God's praises to you. You're trying to build yourself up. We live in a culture that is becoming more secular. Almost all of our normal ways of doing ministry in the West, and listen, I'm not the first person to say this, assume people who have got certain religious dots. And then ministry is just connecting those dots. So the religious dots are, they believe in God, they believe in moral truth, they do have some concept of sin and guilt that they not live the way they should. Yeah. They do think there's something out there beyond this world, maybe there's an afterlife. In other words, there's religious dots that people have always had, even if they weren't Christians. And then evangelism and discipling is basically connecting the dots they already have. What happens when you get into a culture where increasing numbers, especially young people, don't have the dots? Wow. So the idea of sin isn't really coherent, and they got no good sense of it. The idea of moral truth, doesn't, out there that I have to align with, just isn't there. And if you don't understand that change that's happening in the culture right now, and you just keep on doing business as usual, you're going to become less and less effective. And to know the culture is part of wisdom. Yeah. It's part of wisdom is to know the times and the seasons. Knowing God, knowing yourself, knowing others, and knowing the times and seasons. And that's what wisdom is. And a lot of people don't know the times and seasons.
Does that concern you for the American church going forward?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm glad you used a word like concern. That's a nice, modest word. You didn't say, are you frightened? Are you paralyzed with fear? Are you freaking out? But don't ask me those questions. I'm concerned.
You are?
Yeah, I am, very.
Why? If you don't mind me asking.
Well, I do, I get to Europe, I read about Europe, I see church planting in Europe, and I see how hard it is.
Yeah.
And I one of the questions I ask is America on its way to being that secular? And I don't know if it's true or not, but if it is, I wouldn't say anybody in Europe is actually, they haven't cracked the code either. It's really, really hard, put it this way, if you're talking to, even if you go to a Hindu, a Muslim, if you go to the animists of Africa, you go to Latin America, they still had a concept of a moral truth and sin and guilt and shame. Yeah. Okay? So there's a sense in which they actually had the dots. You might say they had religious dots. And so missionary work has always been able to work with the dots and help people connect the dots. But we really don't know much about a relatively new phenomenon, which is post-Christian secularism, where they don't have the dots, and where they've almost been inoculated against Christianity because it's a post-Christian society. So am I concerned about us as the church floundering around not knowing what to do? Yeah. So I am just filled with sweetness and light today.
No, I mean,
But you asked the question.
Well, in light of sweetness and disappointment and concern, I'll ask this question. You said this on January 5th, so recently. You said, Lord, I want to be successful, but for many wrong reasons. Do everything necessary, even bringing into my life humbling disappointments, to go along with our theme today, that will teach me to care more about being faithful than being successful. Tell me a little bit behind that, and then I have a follow-up question that would be specific to a church planner.
Well, I got a simple question. That's what you said. That's the prayer for January 5th.
That's the prayer,
okay. Well, I'll tell you why. In general, success makes you stupid. Okay, it does not make you wise; it makes you foolish. Because what happens is the human heart is a sinful human heart. Right? We believe that. What that means is that when you're successful, the heart always takes more credit for that success than it ought to. Always. It's because our heart is self-justifying. So what happens is you get successful and you say, I did that, I was smart enough, I did the research, I knew what to do, and actually it was a gift from God. God is providence, talents, whatever He did, and you take credit for it, and therefore you become less. You actually become less self-aware. You don't see your limitations. You become overconfident. And according to the book of Proverbs, being wise in your own eyes is the heart of being a fool, because it sets you up to make very bad decisions. Bad decisions for who to marry, how to raise your children, actually how to make other business deals. A lot of people who've been very successful in the beginning, because they get overconfident, just make absolute disastrous questions afterwards, because they trusted their gut. And now my gut is magic, but no, it wasn't. It was God. It wasn't your gut. So the reason I say, please, Lord, save me from success, is because what success I have usually makes me stupid, and generally failures and disappointments makes me wiser. So that's what that's behind.
So let me ask you this, looking back at this church planning journey that you've been on, what disappointments as a church planner have taught you the greatest lessons?
Well, okay, good. That's a good question, because usually in the past, when I've been asked that question, I think most people, when they are asked a question like that, you're thinking about something major. And I have made some mistakes. In other words, I hired some wrong people, people who were wrong for the position. I don't mean wrong people. I was the wrong person. The hirer was wrong. And anyway, so I could look at those, and I think a lot of people in ministry look back and realize I made a wrong selection. I recruited the wrong person. But actually, the main place where the failures and disappointments have happened is in almost dozens of sermons that really weren't very good, and dozens of pastoral connections where I really wasn't very sensitive. You know, in pastoral work, sometimes I was too hesitant to say something because I was being cowardly, or I was actually too abrasive, and I really should have been more patient. So hitting that just right, and the same thing with preaching, is lots and lots of sermons that afterwards I said that I didn't do it. I just didn't do it. Either I got lost, or I beat them over the head, So actually, it's just dozens and dozens of sermons that really weren't good. And I went home and I said, I've got to be better. I've got to do better. And dozens of pastoral cases where I said, I wasn't wise. And those things have made me, it just takes so much practice to get good at anything. So much practice. And those disappointments were the ones. So it's not the big ones. It's those little pastoral and preaching fails.
Sure. That
most people probably wouldn't go home and say he failed, but I knew I did, and that's where I think those things actually are the most helpful to me.
And in light of that, what would you say to an individual who is considering church planting? As you talk about the success can make you stupid, which can be the story of a lot of church planners.
Yeah.
They can have immediate success, and then others walking through disappointments.
Well, what do you say to a person who's thinking about church planting? I would say certainly you do have to watch your motives. Let me give you three. Let me give you three motives that are partly right, but if it's the main motive, they're wrong. Okay. One reason you want to plant a church is you say, most churches are awful, and I want to plant the right kind of church, with the right doctrine and the right stuff. Okay, so that's partly right. I mean, there are a lot of bad churches, but if the main reason you want to plant the church is because I can plant a better church, my kind of church, okay, that's bad. A second kind of is, I'm going to win the whole world for Christ through this church plant, which I hope you will, by the way. I really would like it if you did.
That'd be great.
But on the other hand, it's triumphalistic. It's like, I'm going to win the world, I'm going to bring revival. And you sort of set yourself up for failure. What if God wants to give you a church of 70 people and 30 converts after 4 years? Especially in a place like New York, I would consider that's very successful.
Right.
And I think that would be great. But anyway, so I'm going to have a better church than other churches. I'm going to have a more evangelistically, we're going to win the world. And then there's another, I guess you could say, I want to plant a cool new model church that is really engaging the culture in a way that nobody else is. That's elitist. So the first is sectarian, the second is triumphalistic, the third is elitist. On the other hand, you should want a better church, you should want to be evangelistic, and you should actually even want it to perhaps help other churches do things better. But the main reason I want to plant a church is because it's a way of being faithful to Jesus Christ, and it's something that Jesus uses in his world mission. And if you feel like maybe I got the gifts to do it, and I'm going to have to get other people to tell me whether I do or not, then that would be a great way to contribute to the world mission of the church. But you should go in with your eyes open that it's a more complicated culture than we've ever had. It's a more secular culture than we ever had. It's a more multi-ethnic culture than we've ever had. And those three things make just normal ministry more complicated than it's ever been. And so go into it with your eyes open.
Back to February, you said these words. You assured the church, you told Christianity Today this. I'm becoming a teacher trainer. There's going to have to be a dramatic increase in church leaders in this city if we're going to start all these churches. How did you have the wisdom? So I'm sure you were writing this during that season also, when back in February, I believe, when you told the church that you were retiring, transitioning.
You're right.
How did you have the wisdom to go, man, it's time for something else?
Well, I'm glad you're giving me credit for the wisdom of the move. I mean, I don't think it remains to be seen. I mean, you don't want to leave too soon or too late. That's wisdom. See, wisdom is knowing the right thing to do when the Bible doesn't speak directly to it. So, for example, the Bible, if somebody says, "I'm thinking of committing adultery," I'm wrestling with it, I'm praying about it. You say, "No, you know what? This is not a wisdom issue.
Right, it's already nailed
you
down.
don't do it." But I don't know whether I should take this job. I don't know whether I should leave this job and take another job. Those are wisdom issues, and you can really screw up your life. And yet the Bible doesn't speak directly. So it feels like I didn't go too soon or too late yet, but I actually think it would take another year or so for me to be sure. But it does seem to me that the wise thing to do is not to hold on to the power. It does feel great to be, the top CEO, senior pastor, president, leader. It feels good, but it's dangerous to hold on when you're not really allowing other younger leaders to come up, and you're not using what you know to train new leaders. So if you just hold on to power till you fall witless from the throne, that's unwise. So did I do it at the right time? I hope so. We'll see. I mean, you're being very kind to say it's wise. The first 6 months looks like it probably was the right time, but I'm going to give it a little longer.
Are you enjoying it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't, people constantly ask, do I miss preaching? And then I say no. And then they say, what? And I say, and by the way, it is the best thing I do. And it is my biggest contribution. And you don't miss it? No. And I'll tell you why, because I wasn't able to get much of anything else done. And there's lots of other things I would like to do. I'd like to teach people. I'd like to write things. I'd like to do things. And I could basically every 7 days it was drop everything and, get back to what's going to happen on Sunday. So I've really enjoyed not having to preach every week, even though I know it's probably my biggest contribution to the church. But as my wife said, do you really want to hear Tim Keller preach? Go on the internet, go to YouTube. If you really, whenever somebody says, oh, I want to hear Tim preach, I said, you can hear Tim preach. And there's always some sermons out there you haven't heard. So I don't feel like I'm depriving anybody, and I feel like I'm really enjoying it. Yeah.
What would you say to the like right now, the average age is 55 of the typical senior pastor in America,
Okay.
which is much older than what we've seen in U.S. history. What would you say to the pastor who's wrestling with, okay, I feel like God's calling me to leave, but man, I still want to stay a little longer? What would you say to that pastor in knowing, man, you may want to think about transitioning out?
Well, okay, well, 2 or 3 things. One is, if you are 55, I don't think you realize that every year you're going to feel yourself aging faster than you did before. I mean, in other words, the diminishment in stamina would feel every 5 years, will start to come every 1 or 2 years, and that's coming ahead of you, and you need to know that. Number one. Number two, you actually should have a bit of a ramp. You can't, if you're going to prepare to make a change, younger leaders need to know what the time frame is. They can't hang out waiting for you to suddenly say, oh, I think I'll retire, or I think I'll step out. You need to go to some younger leaders and say, here's how long I'm going to be here, because it does take time to prepare a church for a change. But you also just can't keep putting it off and every 6 months give people an update, because people aren't going to stick around. So you have to give it a fair amount of time, but you also have to be definite. In general, I do think that between 55 and 65, somewhere in there, you do need to make transitions to make room for other people, and not to, and to be more of a trainer, coach, mentor, shepherd. And younger leaders are desperate for those. They're desperate for people to be consultants, mentors, and of course, if you're the top dog of your church, you don't have the time for that.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, I love that you're staying here in the city. There's not this, I'm going off to retire somewhere. Your heart for the city is evident in the things you've written, in the times that I've heard you preach. Why, and you've said this a lot, but I think for those listening in and watching this, why are cities so important?
Oh. Well, it's still probably the simplest thing. Right now, it may change 50, 100 years from now, but right now, cities are growing virtually everywhere. People are moving into the cities very fast. In the non-Western world, it's enormously fast. So in China, Africa, and Latin America, it's astonishing. But even New York City is growing something like 1 million people net over about a 20-year period.
Wow.
And so when Jesus says, go and make disciples of all nations, obviously, the word nations doesn't mean countries, it means peoples. That means you got to go where the peoples are. And if the people of the world are moving into cities faster than the church is, which it is, by the way, they are. People of the world are moving into cities faster than the church is, then the church is being disobedient to the Great Commission, which is a little harsh. And, we Presbyterians are, we don't bang things, but it's a little hard for me to say. But it's true that you've got to go where the people are. The people are going to cities. Now, there's other reasons, but I think that might be enough.
Sure.
Your wife said this about you, that you're wired to teach and train the next generation. She said that to Christianity Day again, by the way. Is there any concern, or is there any advice that you would give next generation pastors coming up?
Oh yeah, and I'm just really afraid they're gonna roll their eyes and say, yes, of course he would say that. Tell me something else. They don't pray nearly as much as they ought to, and I actually think that, from what I can tell, every 10 years, it does seem to me that the people I'm getting to know have more trouble with solitude, or at least they don't know what to do with it, or they certainly don't know how to find it. And I can just tell you, you're not praying enough. You're not. You're under pressure to produce, and you're going to get There's instant payoff for producing things. There's no instant payoff for prayer. In fact, only God knows whether you have, pretty much.
Wow.
And yet, the self-knowledge, the I guess I say the ballast, the poise, so much that is crucial for being a great in ministry comes from prayer. So I don't know. I mean, I look back and I say I just didn't pray enough, and I'm almost certain that anybody who hears me say it says, of course, very spiritual. I should pray more. But tell me something I really need to hear.
You don't think you prayed enough?
I did not.
Wow.
I did not, and I know you're not. I just know it. I know it because at least not enough. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't any exceptions, but I'm saying in general, we talk about it all the time, and we have books on it. I wrote a book on it, but people still, it's just an incredible struggle, and the culture we're in now makes it harder than it's ever been.
Even being a pastor,
it's
a struggle.
Yeah, which really we have no excuse because
we get paid for it.
We get paid. We get paid to do religious things. Right. We get paid to do religious things. Yeah. And you can show up in your office and lock the door and pray, and nobody's going to say, "Hey, you're not earning your salary." Yeah. Nobody's going to say that to you. Well, it's going to be true if you're in the business world. They say you can't do that. You don't pray on my time. But we don't. We don't.
Even with all things God's allowed you to do, you think you could have prayed more?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Very interesting.
And I would have done everything else better. Everything else better.
It's a good word.
So, incredible lesson for anybody. Great for the next generation, my generation of planters that are out there. What's one thing in the last, say, 5 years of this journey that you've learned about church planting? Maybe you didn't learn it in the first season of the journey, but in the last 5 years that you'd say, you know what, I think this would be helpful to somebody who's planting.
Oh, well, it goes back to something we talked about a bit earlier, back when we were talking about how concerned I was.
Yeah.
I would say in the last 5 years, I'll give you an example of this, all right? In the last 5 years, I recognized that evangelism, the way we do it, we need to not stop doing the evangelism we are doing, because it's almost like there's in almost most places in the world, in the United States, there's almost like two worlds. There's an older world of people who've still got the religious dots. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that they're Christians, but it just means they've got you might say, the mental furniture for the normal kinds of evangelism and discipling. And then you've got, but it's also, that's an aging and somewhat shrinking world.
Sure.
But most churches, and this is certainly true, most churches can actually still grow, living almost completely in that shrinking circle. It's almost like you're an island in a stream, and the island's getting smaller. But you can still actually, and also, by the way, since the people there tend to be older, you can actually feel pretty good about your giving, and you can feel you can build a new building.
Yes.
And meanwhile, the growing world, which tends to be younger, they don't have the dots, and that's the growing world, and we actually don't have evangelism. We're not tooled for that. So, for a quick example, final statement is my Reason for God book, which I'm glad God's used, and many people talk about it. It's definitely for that world of people that have the dots. And I began to realize that for the other world, you have to start back further. Reason for God still basically assumes people have objections, and they even think Christianity is an option, or they wouldn't be asking questions. But what if you're over here where you say, Christianity and religion is just for infants. It's just emotionally infantile. It's not even something I would even consider. So, and they don't have those religious dots. Then you have to start back further, way back further. And I realize I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about that. Though in New York, I've actually done it personally. I haven't done a great deal of training or thinking a lot about it. And I wrote another book called Making Sense of God just a couple of years ago that was in that 5-year window. What I started to realize is we're going to have to start back further.
Yeah.
And church planting is only going to work if we start back further and learn how to do evangelism for that other world.
A couple quick questions before we let you go here.
Yeah.
What are some tools the church is going to need in a post-Christian culture when it comes to evangelism, in your mind?
Well, it's going to become less programmatic. I do think, for example, the seeker church where you have high production values, great music, terrific speaking, great programs, still works with non-Christians who've got the religious dots. If you can show them that church is relevant, they'll be there.
Okay.
Most churches are not. So people don't feel the pressure to go to church anymore. There's no social pressure to go to church, or at least it's going away.
Right.
But now they're not going to come unless they see it's really relevant. But generally, the secret churches are for people connecting the dots. The people who don't have the dots generally can't be won through big programs. They're won through relationships. And what that means is more workers working with fewer people, which, by the way, is not cost effective.
Right, not at all.
No, no. What you really want is you want to pay one great preacher, evangelist salary, shows up in town, and 2 years later has 500 people,
Right.
and 100 or 200 baptisms, and that's very cost effective.
And those days are gone.
Well, not all. No.
Not
Listen,
totally.
no. Wait. But see, here's the problem. This is what's seductive: is there's plenty of places in this country where there's enough of the older world where you can do that. They're not gone. But what my concern is that learning how to deal with people without the dots. There are ways of doing it. You're not working with their idea about God and afterlife and guilt and sin. You're working with their desire for beauty, their passion for justice, their desire to be fully known and fully loved, but they don't know how they can do that. So you have to go. There's ways of working with people, and there's ways of relating to people, but it takes relationships. It takes a lot more time. It is not, frankly, as inexpensive, and you have to have agencies who are willing to not worry about the bottom line, frankly, and make sure that missionaries are going to be doing more. You might say more one-on-one,
Sure.
and less big meetings and come forward. So.
Wow. Last question here.
Yeah.
I cannot believe I'm going to ask you this last question in your old office, by the way. This is not going to be fair, this question here. So I want to make sure you only have one, just one thing out. So I'm asking on this one. What one thing have you...
Unfair.
It's not fair. So what one thing have you learned while pastoring Redeemer? One thing that just comes to your mind. You'd go, and this is the one thing. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. No. Well, actually, this is the one thing that my wife says I still haven't learned. So this is really
This is going to be good.
This is really going to be good. That I'm completely replaceable. I have not learned that. I've always felt like, no, there's nobody can replace me. I've got to do it. There's nobody else who can do this. I got to do it. It's just absolutely. She says, there's been unbelievable people who everybody's heard about, historic people who God has just taken at the age of 38, run over by a bus, bang, because God knew only God's is irreplaceable. Everybody else is replaceable, and so my wife's always trying to say, you can relax. You're not the savior of the world. You're not irreplaceable. I mean, so those of us who tend to overwork and feel over-responsible. I'm an oldest child. I can give you all my excuses.
I know that feeling, yes.
I'm the one that I have to do it. I have to be responsible. And so you're saying, what's the one thing you've learned? That's the one thing I should have learned, and I still haven't learned. And my wife was just talking to me about it this week. And so there we are. So, honey, I'm trying to learn it. I just want you to know.
After 28 years, you're trying to learn it.
She's probably not going to watch this, but if she does, I want her to know.
We're going to make sure we send her a copy of this one.
Okay.
Thank you for your time. I got to tell you, it's an honor to be here for Dustin and I to be here today. Thank you so much. What you've done. I know you hate this when people do this. I've seen you before, kind of cringe when people will compliment you on this. But thank you for what you've done for the kingdom. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'll try not to cringe. Thank
No,
you.
thank you.
No, honestly, I appreciate that very much.
We are so appreciative of you.
Thank you, guys.
Definitely.
Thank you.